Hello, my name is Sylvia Abrams, and I'm pleased to be with you for this session of Tikkun at Home. I'm going to be talking about the book Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love by Dani Shapiro. Ordinarily, you would be in the same room with me, have read the book, and we would be talking about it together. This time, though, I'm going to try to pose and answer most of the questions that you may have about the book, but I will be leaving a number of items for you to think about, and hopefully after we're done, you'll go to the library, either in person or digitally, and decide to take it out. So here we will start. Here's a cover of Dani Shapiro's book, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. You'll notice that there is a dress on the cover, which may give you a little bit of a hint about what she's going to write about. Shapiro tells the story of her experience of learning through a recreational DNA test that her biological father was not Paul Shapiro. Rather, she had been conceived by the primitive practice of mixing Paul's sperm with that of an anonymous donor who she later was able to identify. Inheritance, this book, debuted at number 11 on the New York Times bestseller list, and Ruth Franklin called it a beautifully written and deeply moving story. The San Francisco Chronicle described Inheritance as compulsively readable as a mystery novel while exploring the deeper mysteries of identity and family and truth itself, a story told with great insight and honesty and heart. So let's take a look at some things about the book. So you may ask, why have I chosen this book for Shavuot? Well, if you've read the book, you'll know that when you experience it, it is in many ways like a detective novel. Shapiro opens with the fact that her husband challenged her to take a recreational DNA test and was shocked to find out that when her results returned, that she, expecting to be 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, turned out to be 52% Ashkenazi Jewish and 48% other things. So why do we want to talk about this at Shavuot? The reason is that we all, at this time of year, are recollecting the fact that we were all supposed to have been at Sinai, a member of the Jewish people, and committing ourselves to our heritage. And in this book, Shapiro, who was from what she thought was a prominent Orthodox Jewish family, finds her allegiance and identity with the Jewish people challenged. And as we look at this together, we can get a sense of what it means to have your identity challenged, and do you really feel that you yourself can still believe that you were at Sinai if this is what you discovered? So let's take a look at who Dani Shapiro is. And you'll see here that there's a brief bio of her. I'm going to go through a few slides to show this to you. She was born in 1962 in New York. She has a BA and MFA from Sarah Lawrence College, and she currently lives in Bethlehem, Connecticut. She's the author of a number of works. Her memoirs include Inheritance, which we're talking about today, Hourglass, Still Writing, Devotion, Slow Motion. She has also written several novels, including Black and White and Family History. Shapiro's short fiction essays and journalistic pieces have appeared in The New Yorker, Granta, The House, One Story, Vogue, Oprah, New York Times, and many other places. She's taught writing programs at Columbia University, NYU, the New School, and Wesleyan. She's co-founder of a writers' conference in Italy. In 1997, she married screenwriter Michael Marin. They have one child, Jacob, and live in Litchfield County in Connecticut. And it's very important that we think about her relationship with her husband, Michael. She's very happily married, and as we go through the various items that we're going to find out as we look at the book, her warm marriage relationship makes a big difference to her weathering what we're going to learn. So one of the big questions is, what's a memoir, and how do we think about one? Because sometimes when you read something like this, you'll say, this is unbelievable. There is absolutely no way that this could be true. But the definition of a memoir is a record of events written by a person having an intimate knowledge of them and based on personal observation. And one of the questions we may ask is, why are memoirs so popular right now? Because Shapiro calls herself a serial memoirist. If you looked at the previous slide, I'm just going to go back quickly, you'll see she's written 5 memoirs. And I think that these books are very popular because we seem to be in an era of tell-all. And in an era of tell-all, we like it when people reveal themselves to us. The difference, I think, between a memoir and an autobiography is that in a memoir, there is much more exposure to what the person is really thinking about. And in the case of Dani Shapiro, in this book, Inheritance, there's much more of that, as we will see. So let me give you a little more of a plot synopsis than what I told you. This is a memoir about a staggering family secret discovered by a genealogy test, an exploration of urgent ethical questions surrounding fertility treatments and DNA testing, and a profound inquiry about paternity, identity, and love. Shapiro asks, what makes us who we are? What combination of memory, history, biology, experience, and that ineffable thing called the soul defines us? So in the spring of 2016, through a genealogy website to which she had whimsically submitted her DNA for an analysis, Shapiro received the stunning news that her father was not her biological father. And we, with her, will now discover what happens. It's a book. This book is about secrets, about family and the shame and self-protectiveness of finding out what this is and what happens. It's a story of a woman's urgent quest to unlock the story of her own identity, a story that has been scrupulously hidden from her for more than 50 years. Because one of the things that's very important as we're looking at this book is what it means to have this kind of thing uncovered. In Shapiro's case, she was 54. So in these years, she had already been writing a great deal, as I mentioned, as a memoirist. It's a book about the extraordinary moment in which the science and technology have outpaced medical ethics, and in this case, we will see what it does to one person. So I found several themes in the book that I think you will agree are important, and we'll go through them as we go through these next slides, and I think it will be a way for you to get some insight into what Shapiro's book is about and also how it relates to Shavuot. So the themes we're going to look at are genealogy, lineage, identity, what does it mean to be Jewish, what makes a family, and secrets. So the title of the book is Inheritance, and one of the questions is, what does it mean in the context of this memoir? And I think one of the very important things we want to think about when we think of inheritance, most of us probably think of money and goods from people, or we think of what we may have inherited as our personality or some favorite object. In this case, Dani Shapiro felt that she had inherited a distinguished family and great love from her father, and she had not inherited her physical looks from either parent, as you may recall in the picture I showed you at the beginning. She's a blonde, blue-eyed, very fair-skinned woman. And this book really is asking us the question, what do we inherit from whom? And what does this mean in the case of our heritage? And in her case in particular, what's her Jewish heritage? So let's start with the point about genealogy. We know that home genealogy tests have become very popular. If you look on television, Ancestry in particular constantly is suggesting that you spit into a tube and send this back, and they have these very charming ads in which they show someone in a kilt who says, oh, I thought I was Irish, and in the next picture he's in lederhosen. It turns out I was German. But it's not quite as simple as that, which we find out in this story. In particular, what is the current popularity of finding these tests and what it means for Shapiro's situation. If you read the story, and some of you may have done genealogy, I should mention that I'm the past president of the Jewish Genealogy Society, so I got a great kick out of how simple this all sounded in this book. Within a space of 36 hours from receiving the test, friends have helped Shapiro and her husband interpret the data, locate the relative who's listed there as a first cousin, find his lineage, figure out who the individual was who could be her bio-dad, the term that's used for this kind of person, and found her a YouTube of the gentleman giving a lecture. In real life, if you do genealogy and attempt to do DNA, it's nowhere like that. People will spend years looking for relatives and spend a lot of time on dead ends. And individuals who have been found out that they were donor conceived can spend their lifetimes and never find anything but a serial number. So this thread of genealogy is very important to our story and to thinking about who we are. The next thing that is very involved in the book is lineage. So in our story, much of Shapiro's understanding of herself comes what she believes to be her lineage. She is the daughter of a gentleman named Paul Shapiro, who it turns out her grandfather was one of the founders of Torah Umasora. Her family had attended, her father's lineage and ancestors had attended very famous universities. They had been in famous yeshivas. Her father was a friend of Rabbi Haskell Lookstein and other great names in modern Orthodoxy. And on the walls of her home, she had pictures of her relatives, her grandparents, her great-grandparents, and was very proud of this lineage. So one of the questions that we really need to ask when Shapiro finds out that her biological father is not the gentleman who she thought was her father, but this donor, it seems to really affect her identity much more perhaps than another person. Because if you feel you're from an illustrious lineage and you're very connected to the people who you feel you're descended from, it was like an earthquake for her to find out that this was not her identity. And in her case, one of the questions is, what does it mean to be Jewish? And you may wonder, why would this matter to her since her mother is a Jewish woman? In the story, she approaches Rabbi Haskell Lookstein to discuss the halachic Jewish law relationships of her discovery to her identity. And he reassures her that she certainly is a Jewish woman, that her son is a Jewish child, because he thought her concern was the issue of what defines being Jewish. But for her, it's much more than the sense of where she fits in Jewish law. It's much more that her whole relationship to Judaism was through her father, through her taking her to shul, through the Shabbos afternoons she spent with her family, to the people who she met who were part of her father's greater circle. And this very much affected what it means for her to be Jewish. And when we think of Shavuot, one of our own questions might be, what does it mean for us to be Jewish and to celebrate this holiday of the giving of the law, in particular of the Ten Commandments? So we then want to turn some more to this issue of identity, which I've begun to really, as you notice, mention quite a bit. The 7th chapter of our book opens with a discussion of the nature of identity, and there's a beautiful quote here. What combination of memory, history, imagination, experience, subjectivity, genetic substance, and that ineffable thing called the soul makes us who we are, is what Shapiro asks us on page 27. So when you think about that, I really want you to think about this for when we're done this evening or this afternoon, depending on when you're participating. What do you believe makes you you? What particular things about your own identity are the things that make you you? In the case of Shapiro, she felt that the foundation of her identity had been completely undercut. And much of her book is about this issue of secrets. She writes, all my life I had known there was a secret, What I hadn't known was that the secret was me. And as our story develops, we learn that the donation, the sperm donation that had happened, which turned out to create her, was not on purpose from her parents. She was, as I mentioned, born in 1961, and there's a long discussion in the book about artificial insemination and secrets. And one of the things she learns is that her parents had had fertility problems, and she, of course, would never have known this herself. She questions older friends of the family and learns that it took a long time for her to be born. Her mother had had several miscarriages. And the secret that her parents had been to a fertility clinic was, first, that's what she thought the secret was, but then, of course, the secret turns out to be that she is not of her father's genetic material. So one of the questions we need to ask when we think about identity and fertility technology is what it might have meant if Shapiro had known all her time growing up that she had been the product of a donor. But in her case, it's really moot because DNA as testing hadn't even been invented at the time that her parents had the fertility treatments. So we now come to the issue of the ethics of reproductive technology. And in this case, how Shapiro's experience with contemporary reproductive medicine affects the way she judges her parents. As she begins to investigate this gentleman, the bio-dad, who she finds out was a medical student at the University of Pennsylvania, she learns that her parents went to a reproductive technology or fertility clinic in Pennsylvania at Penn, and learns that many medical students donated sperm at that time, and that it was very, very common for the doctors who were doing artificial insemination to, quote, enrich, unquote, the sperm of the donor. And one of the conundrums for Shapiro and for us as the readers is, did her parents know? I've talked about this book with several friends of mine, and many have said they think neither parent knew. Others say they were sure the parents knew, and a third say they think the mother knew that the sperm had been enriched. But what doctors used to do in that era was ask the couple to have sexual relations immediately before and immediately after the artificial insemination procedures so that they would never know if it had been the father's sperm or not, which would lead me to believe that they must have known the sperm was being enriched. Of course, at that time, no one had any idea that DNA would have been discovered and been a way to identify what had happened. So for future one of the big ethics in this story is, what do you imagine future generations will say about all our current approaches to artificial insemination? We have so many more ways today in which to create children for people who are infertile that is much, much harder than what we knew of at that time. So there's a tremendous ethics that are involved in the effects of discovering secrets over identity. In the case here, Shapiro leaves the reader puzzling over how the DNA and reproductive technologies affect a person who discovers her origin in adulthood. We see her as one example of how it completely shakes her up. I should have mentioned that one of the things she does is legally shorten her name. Her mother had called her Danielle, and everybody thought her name was Daniela, and she shortens her name to Dani, D-A-N-I. And she also, when we think about this, we need to think about the devastating secrets that affect the generations afterwards with the newer methods of technology, which allow many more individuals to become parents. And since her book came out, there have been lots of exposés of individuals who have found out that they were donor conceived and tried to contact not only the bio dad, as it's called, but also all the other half siblings that may have been conceived by that same person. And in the United States, there are no laws limiting the number of people who may be conceived by a donor. So, and of course, and now in the United States, as well as having donor semen from a male, it's possible to have a donor egg. And one of the big questions is, do the children of such different types of conception have a right to know? And of course, Shapiro very much shocks us and makes us think deeply about what this means for us. So one of the questions I would leave you with from this is, how does each one of us view our own inheritance? At Shavuot, we are thinking about our Jewish heritage. We're thinking about whether we consider ourselves one of those people who stood at Sinai. We also, at the same time, while we're thinking about that, this book can help us really consider the corrosive power of secrets in our own lives. One of the questions we really need to think about at this time when we're studying together virtually because of the pandemic affecting us is how we stay centered in a time of uncertainty. And in comparison to our time of uncertainty, some of us may feel that Shapiro's uncertainty seems extravagant compared to that. However, I'd like to leave you with a thought that maybe you might want to consider, considering our own time of uncertainty. Should we at this time now consider writing our own memoirs of this time period? It might be very interesting to leave as a legacy, digitally or in paper, for our own children what we thought this was about. So I'd like to let you know the places where I found the information for this talk in case you want to look up some more things about it. As I mentioned, you can also find this book, Inheritance, digitally right now from the county and the county library and from CleveNet. And if you're listening from someplace out of town, I'm sure you can find it there. It's not a long read, and I hope you will enjoy it. I want to thank you for participating with me and thinking about this book, and I hope that the rest of this holiday is very nice for you. Chag Sameach.